Greetings, my name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, or TPH Games as my little games channel here is called, and today I want to discuss an issue that we can observe for quite some time. I would call it a trend when it comes to game releases. As you are probably aware, Starfield will release, from the perspective of this recording, in a couple of hours at the 6th of September 2023. But if you would have paid extra and bought the Starfield Digital Premium Edition, you could have played up to 5 days earlier, so already on last Friday. And this is a trend we also see with other game releases, so my critique here is not directed at Starfield directly, it's just the most recent example here. I'm a bit in two minds when it comes to early access. I know the Steam Early Access program that is often used by indie developers, and here I can kind of understand it because there the budget is very limited. They have the opportunity to bring out their game to some degree already, and through this way get additional funding for their game. And funding is definitely a problem for a lot of indie developers, so I can understand doing this. Microsoft, Activision, Blizzards and so on are no indie companies though, and they have enough money to fund their game development. They don't need this mechanism. Further, let people who are very interested in the game follow the development and how the game slowly progresses, updates, gets bigger until it's hopefully fully released and comes out. Some games did this pretty well in the past. I think of Darkest Dungeon or, for example, also Divinity Original Sin. I think 1 and 2 both did this, and also Baldur's Gate 3 did it. Though here you can already kind of criticize it because it's a very big ambitious project that is definitely far beyond the scope of a small indie developer. If I remember correctly, Baldur's Gate 3 also did a very similar approach to Starfield for PlayStation 5 though, which is different for early access on PC on Steam. And of course Diablo 4, if I remember correctly, did this as well. Buy the more expensive version, play a bit earlier. And there are definitely many more examples for this. Even in the Steam Early Access program, there are, in my opinion, games where it's completely not worth buying them early access. Kerbal Space Program 2 we covered here on this channel briefly when this entered early access, and my conclusion was kind of, don't buy it until it's in a far better state. It got now a few updates, but it's still nowhere close to where it should be, and just shows that they were quite desperate releasing this game early, maybe due to funding issues and so on. So I still hope Kerbal Space Program 2 gets better and is releasing and becomes a fantastic game at release, but currently I think it seems they are still a bit off. Though I haven't checked the last update, so take what I say here with a grain of salt here. However, when I think of games that had a very good early access phase, they usually have some benefits. Like the game is cheaper if you buy in very early on. So you get an unfinished product, but you have to pay less. Therefore, you can send feedback and maybe help the developers with this. Maybe finding some bugs or maybe changing small directions in the game that are not fun yet, and so on. Feedback is very valuable. Further, if the point in development is chosen wisely for an early access release on Steam, then you already get a game in a state that is at least playable, and you can already have a good time with it, even though some features and content is missing and there might be some bugs here and there. But I remember several games where I got a lot of playtime out of early access games in at least some point during the early access phase, like Kerbal Space Program 1, Darkest Dungeon, Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, Raft, Satisfactory. I think out of Satisfactory we can get like thousands of hours already just playing the early access game. I think it's still not released though. And there are definitely many more which I just forgot to list here. But I guess it becomes clear that this is a completely different concept to what we now see with Starfield, with Diablo 4 and so on. There is a huge difference here. Here we have these games that are pretty hype, I would call them. There's a huge marketing campaign that tries to sell the game, that tries to tell people you need to play this game, it's the best game ever. And people get excited because they like the genre, maybe they like previous games, especially Bethesda games are very popular. Think of Skyrim, Morrowind, even Oblivion and so on, the Fallout games. There's just a lot of legacy beyond those games over like 3 decades, and this is now a new IP. People are of course excited by it, but of course they also sold us the game before. And now they say, well, you could play 5 days before the release, just pay a little bit extra. And here it gets a little bit messy in my opinion. Of course, when you buy the digital premium edition of Starfield, you already get the Shattered Space story expansion when it will be released. So the first story expansion DLC, I would call it. However, besides the name that was also just dropped in the announcement of this edition, we know nothing about this DLC. There is no review, there's no trailer, there's no information about this at all, because the game is not released yet. So they exploit this excitement and make some people potentially buy this premium edition for $30 or euros more. So we are now at $100 or euros for this edition, to pre-order a DLC we know nothing about and maybe play 5 days earlier. I'm kind of surprised that this was not discussed more online, to be honest, especially if you carefully look at the date in the case here of Starfield. Like if we look 5 days back of early access, this would be Friday. And to my knowledge, Monday is Labor Day in the United States, so for some people it's a long weekend, so they have extra time to play the game. Wouldn't it be much more consumer friendly if just all people could play the game over the long weekend? Now for the other people who don't want to pay $100 for Starfield and pre-order a DLC we know nothing about, those can now start playing on Wednesday in the middle of the week. Thanks Microsoft, much appreciated. It's also kind of ironic that they call it early access and you have to pay more to play the game earlier, while in the actual early access programs on Steam you often pay less for the game and help out the developers. But as said, this is completely a different approach here. This is not about helping the developers develop the game during early access. This is just basically a staged release. The game was in a releasable state already on Friday and they released it there, and only the second-class customers who don't want to pre-order the story DLC have to wait till Wednesday. That's basically what it is. I mean, of course, the game has bugs, the game has some performance issues as well, but it's definitely in a releasable state and not as bad as some other games were in the past, like the Cyberpunk 2077 release, and also this year Jedi Survivor, which for me still takes the cake for AAA game releasing in such a terrible state, especially on PC in 2023, that I'm almost speechless. By the way, today came a new patch for Jedi Survivor. Haven't tested it yet, but I maybe also make a short update video about that soon. But that's a different topic. Of course, from the perspective of a company, what Microsoft or Bethesda is doing here with this staged release makes complete sense, because they get kind of double the coverage of their game, if that makes sense. Because all the streamers, and let's call them influencers, and I guess I'm part of the problem, are already covering the game from Friday over the weekend. And now the game actually releases on Wednesday, and a lot of people who don't want to buy the premium edition are now starting playing the game and are also talking about it online. So this kind of expands the presence on the internet and on social media. Further, and maybe take this with a grain of salt, they might get 5 extra days to fix the game or to react to some smaller issues that might occur in the release version or in the early access version of the game. And then they can say, wait, that problem appeared in the early access version, will be fixed in the release version. So to be completely fair, 5 days from a software development standpoint is not that much to fix a lot of things. Maybe enough for a hot fix or something. Though at least on Steam, at least to my knowledge, you could have refunded Starfield no matter how long you played during the early access phase. However, I think when the game is fully released, you just can't refund it after you have spent your 100 hours with the game. And as a result, you also have to keep the DLC, even though you potentially would not like it. That adds a level of corporate cleverness to this, in my opinion. But as a result, this is actually a smart move, to be completely honest here. But it's, in my opinion, not a very consumer-friendly move, and is a trend we see too often with other games. I would just like that they would stop doing that, because it kind of splits the player base, and it also has some downsides when it comes to, especially in story-driven single-player games, to spoilers and so on. So people who did not buy the early access version of the game now have to stay out of the internet and out of the conversation for 5 days because they don't want to get spoiled in the game. Especially if you imagine a scenario where one person buys the game on Wednesday and the others bought it already 5 days earlier over a long weekend. You can imagine the play difference time is quite big and not spoiling each other might be difficult. Though to be fair, Starfield is a game where you might have a very different experience in the game depending who you ask. So here it might not that big of an issue versus some other games with a more linear story. But you can definitely imagine that this also kind of is annoying, especially if it feels like, okay, the other person is kind of a second-class customer, and we're still talking about a €70 or $70 game. That's quite a lot, that's quite expensive, and the other version is $100 or €100. That's kind of ridiculous in my opinion. Even though there is of course a DLC inside it, and if we look for example to the Cyberpunk 2077 expansion, that's also around about €30 or $30, so I guess the 30 extra could be justified depending on how big it is, but still, it is still a DLC we have no information about, and it's just exploiting the excitement of people and making them pre-order a DLC. If you look at this, this is you making an investment, basically lending money or giving a credit to Microsoft, Bethesda or whatever company, these small indie companies, and they pitched you a DLC but told you nothing about it. You have also no say into it, but they still take your money in advance for a product that isn't even out yet. I think that is problematic. You are the consumer, not an investor. And that is why it's kind of important to criticize this. You can of course do with your money whatever you want. And you can maybe even say it's a fair deal. I would have bought the DLC anyway. But keep in mind that this can still be criticized and definitely should be discussed a little bit more online in my opinion. Because if we don't do this, then this becomes maybe even more normal than it is right now, and maybe affect games where it's much worse to have a staged release compared to Starfield. Further, always keep in mind that hype for an entertainment product or whatever product is always created by big marketing companies or departments. It's purely artificial. You don't need this specific video game to survive. Especially in 2023, when there are more fantastic video games coming out than you have time to play them. So it makes no sense to get hyped up about a video game so much that you lose all your rational thinking and get exploited into buying something that you potentially don't need or even know anything about. Hashtag stop pre-ordering games. There may be some exceptions when you own shares of a company or whatever, or if you're a content creator, no, if I get the game early, I can make content and get maybe better views. There are considerations here that might differ from this, but as a normal consumer, why not just wait for reviews, especially if the reviews are out several days earlier anyway, and you can just maybe already look a little bit into the game and see if it's for you or not. Like, the possibilities we have these days are so huge, it makes no sense in my opinion to ever pre-order something, especially not DLCs. It would also be great if we could just play our video games on release all at the same day when they come out. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this little opinion piece, critique video here of the current situation, and I have the bad feeling this might be more controversial than it should be, because I think it's just very logical to not buy things that are not out yet, you know nothing about, and not giving companies money for free in advance. That seems like a smart idea. If you like this video, maybe press the like button, leave a comment, tell me what you think about it in a friendly manner, of course, and maybe subscribe if you want to know more about some video games I might cover here or not. I'm still working on my Cyberpunk 2077 mod showcase that I want to bring out this week if possible. If we learn more about the 2.0 free update for Cyberpunk, I cover it here as well. I also want to cover Phantom Liberty because I'm kind of curious where the game goes with this particular update, and maybe also some other things. I might also look into Starfield tomorrow and maybe make a video there as well. I'm not sure yet. And of course the Jedi Survivor patch 7. I might also make a very small update video on that and just see what impressions I can get out of this. Further, I also stream on Twitch at times. Maybe check that channel there as well. Would be much appreciated. There are also social media stuff. All the links you find in the description. And I would say shoutouts to my supporters. Thank you again for watching and see you people next time. Goodbye.